Shabbos, there was a Malav Malka.
You should take this.
On Motzei Shabbos, there was a Malav Malka in Eshel, in the Kinnis Shluchim. And somebody got up to speak, a gentleman by the name of Rabbi Sendy Vilashansky, who was one of Rabbi Yosef Yitzchok Vilashansky's sons, was also my son's Chavrusa for many years. And he's now Shaliach in Milan. He married the granddaughter of Rabbi Gorelik, Gershon Menachem Gorelik. And he tells a very interesting little story which is very deep, worth thinking about. He tells that when Rabbi Gorelik had been in Italy for not very long, and Rabbi Gorelik was the first Shaliach the Rebbe sent to Europe. There were no Shluchim of Chabad anywhere in Europe. Mm-hmm. And he was in Milan, and the Secretariat contacted Rabbi Gorelik and told him that there's going to be a conference in Milan of all the rabbis of Europe, those that were left, and they're going to discuss and they're going to make a vote on making a cherem, veto, of everything to do with Germany. No Jew in the whole of Europe is allowed to buy any product made in Germany. And the Rebbe said that he's heard the plan and it's wrong, it's a bad plan. And he has to go to this conference and he has to invite himself to speak and he has to explain to them why it's a wrong idea and he has to stop it. So he contacted the Secretariat and he said, it sounds all well and good, what exactly am I supposed to say? So he got back, there was no faxes then, but it came, how did they send messages? Telegrams of the outline of what the Rebbe wanted him to say. And told him exactly, okay, fine. So the Rebbe says, he says, right, you don't argue, you do it. So he goes, he finds out where the conference is taking place, and he walks into the hotel where the conference is, and he looks like a rabbi like all the others, and long before the days of bitachon and security, you look like them, so you join them. And he walks into the hall where all these European rabbis are, and nobody knows who he is, nobody takes any notice of him. And the chairman of the conference, whose name is Dayan Schoenfeld, looks up and sees him and says, gentlemen, we have a visitor, we have a rabbi who's come from America to Europe. At the moment, all the rabbis are leaving Europe and going to America. So I'm going to invite this young man, and he's much younger than all of us, to sit next to me. I'm very interested to hear what he's got to say. So Rabbi Gorelik, right. So Rabbi Gorelik, comes, stands up, and he goes and sits down, and then all the people stand up and talk about the cherem and why we should do a cherem on the Germans and Yimah Shemo, blah, blah, blah. And then Dayan Schoenfeld says, well, I know it's not on the program, but I'd very like to hear what this young rabbi from America has got to say, because different perspective. We all of us went through the Shoah, so we feel about it in one way. We'd like to hear what somebody who didn't go through the Shoah says. So Dayan
set it up that way, it doesn't sound very good.
So Dayan Gorelik stands up.
No idea what we went
So Rabbi Gorelik stands up, and stick and paste, he regurgitates exactly what the Rebbe told him to say. And he sits down, and Dayan Schoenfeld says, I think he's absolutely right. I completely support every word that he says. And so they have a vote, and they vote against the cherem. So when everybody's gone, Rabbi Gorelik turns around to Dayan Schoenfeld and says, tell me, what was this all about? So you never seen me before, you don't know who I am, right? And I'm a youngster, and I didn't go through the Holocaust, and you guys all did. And how come you suddenly decided you're against the cherem? So he says, it's very simple. I was in Crown Heights last month, and I went into Yechidus by the Rebbe, and the Rebbe asked me what's going on, and I told him about the conference, I told him about the plan, and the Rebbe explained to me that it was a bad idea, and he said to me exactly what you just said just now, and, I couldn't help but agree with him, but I said to the Rebbe, all well and good, but I, in my position, can't stand up and go against all the rabbis. Need some other way. So he says, no problem, I've got a shaliach, his name is Rabbi Gorelik, and he lives in Milan, and he'll come along, and you'll invite him to speak, and we'll solve the problem. So Sendy made a very interesting point. You better listen to this, right? He said, when we go on shlichus for the Rebbe, and somehow, one way or another, everything works out good, what do we say? Another moifis from the Rebbe, another miracle from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if he would never have asked Diane Schoenfield what was going on, he would have gone home and that's what he would have taken out of it. But in fact, it wasn't a moifis from the river. It was organised by the river from the word go. So says the shlichus is much deeper. We don't just go and rely on miracles from the river. We go to shlichus knowing that the river's already organised it for us. And it's all set up. All we have to do is be stick and paste and do exactly what the Rebbe says, and everything works out. That's what shlichus is really all about. I knew you would like that story. I knew you'd like that story.
So what were the arguments? Do you know?
No.
He didn't say.
Sandy is his grandson by marriage.
Is what?
Sandy Viloshansky is a grandson by marriage of
Gerlich.
Sandy's father-in-law is Shekevitz, who just passed away.
Shekevitz from the Kfar.
What?
Shekevitz from the Kfar.
Yeah, but he married Gerlich's daughter. He went to live in Milan many years ago.
Okay, so the title for this mimer is, Can a Wicked Man Be Godly?
I was saying, this is in Vayishlach, but where in Vayetze?
This is Vayetze.
This is Vayishlach. Oh, this side says Vayetze.
Maybe
Here says Pashas Vayishlach.
yeah.
So where do we start?
And the page that doesn't say Vaishlach. Page 46. 46 on the bottom left. Veshkem Lavan Baboker.
Okay.
So this mimer is basically a mimer about, the way we're going to translate it is, can a wicked man be godly?
Can a wicked man, well, a wicked man can have a nefesh and a kiss.
Can he?
Yeah. A Jew can have a nefesh and a kiss and still be wicked. It's freedom of choice. Do good or bad.
Okay, so let's see what we mean by that.
Bahamas is going to become nefesh and a kiss. But if a goy can be godly, a goy doesn't have a nefesh and a kiss.
So let's
He
see.
still can do mitzvahs. Show mitzvahs when he don't.
Let's see. Veshkem Lavan Baboker. So Lavan got up early in the morning. Vaynashek levanav v'livnotav vayvarech etem. And then he kissed his sons and his daughters, meaning the progeny that he had from Jacob, and he blessed them. This presents something of a turnaround, right? Because Lavan wanted to kill Yaakov.
Mm-hmm.
He certainly wanted to take everything back. When he sees everything, he says, "Oh, this is mine." Right? We talked about this. So, what is this on change of heart and this? What's going on?
Good guy.
Okay. So again, the context is he chased after him. He was going to kill him, and suddenly he decides that he's his best friend, and he wishes everybody only good, and he kisses them, and he leaves. So what's going on here? To understand this, we have to go back to some first principles. Lecha Hashem hagdula v'hagvura. You, Hashem, have greatness and might. Okay? And then you have Tiferet, and Netzach, and Hod. Right? These are the words of King David in Chronicles. Why are all these stated, all these attributes stated in the feminine form in Hebrew? Gdula, Gvura, Tiferet. The others are Netzach, Hod, Yesod. So they're not. But the Gdula, Gvura, Tiferet, they're like feminine. Because they receive from the infinite light. Why? Because for there to be a revelation of God's greatness, it can't be in the infinite light. It has to come further down. There has to be some kind of limitation.
Why does that make it feminine?
Because the feminine is a receiver. Okay? So the sphera, or the attribute of greatness, the attribute of might, is a receptacle. It's a receptacle for the infinite light. And when it's a receptacle, so we've dealt with this question many times, how does the receptacle change the light that's inside, right? Is it just is the light already limited? Is it the mashal that we used, the analogy that we used was when you pour water into a glass cup, and you see that it's colored. So was the water originally colored and the glass is transparent? Is the glass colored and the water is transparent? Is it both of them that are colored? Right? There are three main explanations in Kabbalah. We talked about this a lot in different opportunities. So what it means is that it's a receptacle, and because it's a receptacle, it's able to show one facet of God's infinite nature. Okay? And that's a general introduction to all these topics of going down from the infinite light to our reality. והנה גדולה היא מידת אברהם, כמו שכתוב, והגדלה שמך. Gdula, greatness, is the measure, is the attribute of Avraham. As it says, and I will increase your name, I will make your name great. That's why we call Chesed, which is Gdula. Right? Later in Kabbalah it was explained that when David HaMelech said Gdula, when he said greatness, and we use Chesed, the reason is because Gdula belongs in the world of the crown. In the crown it's called Gdula, it's called greatness. Below the crown, in the world of emanation, it's already called Chesed. So, the fact that we say Elokei Avraham is called great, it means that that's the attribute of Chesed. ושבחו של הקדוש ברוך הוא שכחן ותנותו יתברך, שנמשך ונתפשט אור אינסוף ברוך הוא כל כך עד שיש אורו מתגלה במידת אברהם אוהבי. And Hashem's greatness is that he's able to limit himself, to contract himself, to the point where there can be a person who has some of his attributes. Okay? How can there be a person who has, when you think about this, you would never say about an animal that it's chesed, right? Because all of nature is din. Everything in nature is by decree.
There's a metric somewhere that says you can have all of the attributes from the animals. Different animals do things differently.
You see behaviors. Right? You can see behaviors, but you can't see attributes. The attributes are not there. So we say that the shor, right, is the left side, and the line is the right side. So the line is greatness. But when we say greatness by the line, we don't mean the same thing as chesed. Right? There's no chesed in the line. There's no loving kindness there. It's all din. It's all, when it comes down here into this world, into our world, everything that's in the animal world, everything that's in nature, is all din. It's all judgment.
The eagle has chesed for its young, carries it on his wings.
Rachamim. Supposedly it has some kind of rachmanus. But again, if you would ask, right, you could say that. But if you ask anybody who studies them, what's their nature? They're not. It's not a conscious choice.
Maybe in human beings it's also nature.
But it could be that part of it is nature. Part of it is nature. But still, human beings call it by that name. And they covet it. And they want it. And they want to be that way. We all want to be like Avram. We all want to be like Yitzchak. We want to be like Yaakov. We want to attain those levels. So you're already talking about somebody who wants to change themselves. Who wants to add some attribute of God, some godly attribute to themselves. That doesn't exist in the animal world. No animal is going to go outside of its nature to become something that it's not. Okay? But human beings, that's what human beings are all about. So the very fact that Avram was willing to go in order to increase himself, to become great, that his name be great, he's willing to leave his place, he's willing to leave his nature, right, where he grew up and where he's used to being and so on and so forth. That's an example of the infinite limiting itself so that a human being can grasp part of it, right? But that's the chiddush of a human being. So all this is called the tzimtzum. All this is called the contraction of God's light. And without this contraction of God's light, there would be no such qualities, these qualities of the infinite coming in limited form in different people, and appearing in different ways in different people. והנה האבות הן המרכבה שהוא כל ימיהם בבחינת ביטול, ועל ידי כך זכו להשראת השכינה אור אינסוף ברוך הוא בגילוי ממש, שיהיה אור אינסוף ומידותיו הם המתגלים בנפשם אברהם ואבי ופחד יצחק וכו'. And because Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the patriarchs, were dedicated, they dedicated their entire being, their whole lives, to nullifying themselves to attaining these levels of the infinite light. They were trying to become more and more godly, more and more like God. So they merited to have these attributes revealed in them physically. The people saw that Avraham Avi, he is a man of love. And Pachad Yitzchak, and Isaac is a man of fear of God. And so on. And it showed in their character. והן מידות גדולותיו וגבורותיו של הקדוש ברוך הוא עצמו שנמשך ונשתלשל למטה על ידיהם להיות גילוי אור אינסוף ברוך הוא בכלל נפשות ישראל בבחינת גילוי ממש ולא במחשבה בעלמא. And from them we inherited these traits and they actually exist in us and they're not just thoughtful. It's not just that we think it's a good thing to be this way. We actually act this way. We've been able to incorporate it into our character.
So when you say inheritance, what you're in fact saying,
it's become genetic.
Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov, we wouldn't have the midah Qasuk, or
right. Without them doing the initial work of nullifying their entire being to attaining a godly state, we, their progeny, would not be able to incorporate this into our character. We would talk about it. We would understand its significance, its importance. We would understand that because most of humanity understands why it's important to have loving kindness and to have fear of God and awe of what's greater than you. Most people understand this, but it's a big difference between understanding it, talking about it, and thinking about it, and actually being that way. To be that way, you need something more, and that's what we inherited from them. Right? The Tanya is based on that. The whole Tanya is based on, the first part of the Tanya, is based on the notion that we inherited loving kindness and fear of God from Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And that's why we have concealed love for God, and even if you don't see it, it's in there, you have to bring it out, right? It's in your genes, you just have to bring it out, and all these things that the Tanya discusses. כי המחשבה היא ברשותו של אדם, אל כל אשר יחפוץ, יתנו. והחפץ ימלא את ליבו מחשבתו להטותה פעמים כך ופעמים כך. So he says, because, why? All Jews have, like every other human being, they have thought. And in your thought, you can want whatever you want. Right? You can want whatever it is that you seek in your thought. Okay? But that's not enough.
We're supposed to be controlling our thoughts.
So you want good things,
no,
and most
you want bad things, but you're supposed to be eliminating.
Most men of goodwill want good things, and everybody talks about ethics, and you're supposed to be this type of person and that type of person, and so on and so forth, and you're supposed to act a certain way, and then you're supposed to not just want to be a certain way, meaning you're not supposed to just discuss what is the right way to be. You're actually supposed to feel that this is what I want to become. That's chefetz already. Chefetz is when you have more than just will, you also have a feeling of pleasure in the will. That's how it's described in Chassidus. He's not defining it here, but that's how it's defined elsewhere. It means that it's alive. The will has a soul in it. And the soul of the will is what we call pleasure. So I have pleasure, I seek to be this way because I know that this is how I would feel good about being. I have pleasure in it. I understand what I will receive from it. But that's not enough, because then you have to take the chefetz and the ratzon, meaning the pleasure and the will, and you have to bring them down. And it's called like when you take a peg and you're pitching a tent and you hammer it into the hard ground in a good place where it won't move. And that's called a yated. Utka'ativ yated b'makom ne'eman, says Isaiah. What does he mean? He means that you have to bring these good feelings that you have, these good intentions that you have to make them into something real. And the way that you make them into something real is with the da'at, is with what we call the sphere of knowledge. Why? Because chefetz and ratzon are both in the super consciousness. They're both in crown. And you have to bring it down into your consciousness. It's something that you have to be conscious of. If you're not conscious of it, meaning if you wrote a book on ethics, and you had a lot to say when you were writing it. That's all very well and good. But then you have to spend every day of your life trying to be what you wrote about.
Okay, well, the Goyim were not very good at that.
The biggest the discrepancy that's always talked about in Chabad is about Aristotle.
We're now become a triangle.
Aristotle was not an ethical man. He wrote a lot about ethics, but he acted in ways that were unethical,
Immoral.
terribly immoral. How do you know this? Okay, there's accounts of what he did. It doesn't matter. It's not, we're not here to go into someone's. But you can be a professor of ethics, and excuse me, that's how I make my living, right? But that's not what I am. I don't have to be like that, and I can write about what I want to write about. The same thing, you can think about many, many good things. If you're not pursuing them actively every waking moment to become like that, if you don't have consciousness of it, then it was an exercise in thought.
Theoretical build-up.
Okay. So this has to become a yatid. Yatid also is the acronym for Yesod Tiferet Dat. It has to come through the middle axis. So if you're talking about being a man of loving kindness, so that's very nice. That's the right side. That's the right axis of the Sfirot. If you don't have the middle axis, which is a yatid, which is a peg hammered into a strong place, then you can't become the right side of the Sfirot. You can't become the right axis. You can't become a man of loving kindness. And even if you've inherited these genes from your patriarchs, it's still not enough. It's hidden, it's there. But if you want to bring it out, you have an easier job. You don't have to be completely nullified in every motion that you do to God, because they already did that for you. But you have to still want to pursue it in a very conscious way every waking moment. והוא על ידי הדעת וההכרה בבחינת הרגשה כאילו רואה. And the words here are called knowledge and awareness, hakara, or consciousness, and feeling. Okay? You could say that these three things are aspects of dat. There are three different aspects of knowledge, of the sphere of knowledge. The highest is hakara. Hakara is when you know something, you're aware of it, and yet you are not at the same time aware of yourself. Okay? It's called hakara, because hakara comes literally from the word nukhri, from somebody who's a foreigner. So that it's having an awareness of something, but at the same time not being aware of yourself having that awareness. I mean, there's no one here who's having that awareness. It's just an awareness that there is such a thing. It's close to being intellectual. The reason it's not intellectual is because there's a measure of familiarity with it. Meaning, when something is intellectual, and it's only intellectual, then the way that you see it is that you have no connection to it. There's no itkashrut. Dat is always itkashrut. Dat, knowledge, is always a connection. I can intellectually discuss anything I want. I don't have to have a connection to the topic. In fact, in the academic world, they will tell you that the moment that there's any connection that you have with the topic, you're not a very good speaker about it. You're not a very good presenter of the arguments. To really present the arguments, you can't be passionate about them. You have to discuss them in a very objective manner. Okay? Hakara is as close as that can come to discussing something, having an awareness of something, and yet not feeling that I have a passion about it, not feeling that I have a connection to it.
No obligation.
Okay, I'm not obligated, as it were, but it's not. Because if it was exactly like that, it would be intellectual and not knowledge, and not dat. When you say dat, you're already saying that I already have some affinity to this. What is my affinity? My affinity is not that I feel one way or the other, but rather that I've grown fond of the topic. Okay? I have an awareness that tells me that when I begin to discuss, let's say you're a professor of ethics, happens to be in the university, and you're a professor of this, and when you begin to speak about it, you love the topic. You might not be ethical. You might not act that way. You're not passionate about it, really, because you don't care how you are, but you're passionate about the subject. So that means you have some connection to it already. That's one of the negative things about, for instance, taking Eastern practices and bringing them to the West and leaving their names and saying, "Oh, but we don't do the avodah zarah, the idolatrous part of these things, like yoga, for instance," is that even though you may not do these things, you may not bow down to the Buddha before you practice yoga, and you may not thank the Buddha when you're finished for everything that he gave you, and so on and so forth. You may not do these things, but you call it yoga, and you're very attached to it. People become very attached to these things because when you practice something, what? Yoga in its original form is idolatrous completely. It's part of an idolatrous path. There's nothing kosher about it. You can't. It's just an avizarayu, what we call avizarayu. Avizarayu means something that how do you say, helps, that is it's an apparatus, it's an accessory to idolatry. It helps you reach the state that you want in your worship of the idol. In this case, the worship is of Buddha, sometimes. But in the original yoga, which was developed even before their encounter with Buddha, it was the worship of the different gods, Kundalini, and this and that, and I don't want to mention other names. But it was a worship. Each one of the movements was a worship of that particular god. And that was how they worshipped them. So it was a path to worshiping the god. So in its original form, it's completely forbidden. There's no question. And they brought it to the West, and they say, okay, we're just going to do the movements. Okay. The movements in and of themselves, if it's not connected to the whole path, they might be neutral. They might be even helpful. The problem is that you call it yoga. Okay. Why is that a problem? Because just as the professor of ethics grows fond of his topic, and even though he's a very unethical person, but every time he hears of ethics, he's interested. He's interested, now he's drawn. And one time he may hear that in some Chabad house there's a lecture on ethics, and he'll come, and he suddenly realizes that he's Jewish. And he says, maybe I'm interested in this because I have some affinity to it. I have an inner affinity. Or maybe he just came and he listened to the lecture, and somebody chopped him at the end, and he talked to him and he convinced him to come to Shabbos, and then he convinced him to come put tefillin on, and then he did all kinds of things. And sooner or later, just because of his interest in it, hakara, this is what we're calling it. It's a type of familiarity with it.
Right?
It's awareness that has a connection already, because I'm not just objective about it, I'm also interested in it. This has become something that I'm interested in. Wherever I see it, I'll go. And the same thing happens with yoga. Maybe where you do it in your Chabad house, there's no problem. Maybe. But whenever you go out, and let's say you visit the big city, and you suddenly see a yoga studio, and you say, "Oh, I like yoga because I do that," and then you walk in, and there, they don't just take the movements out and make it into something that's maybe kosher, maybe okay. No, they do the full gamut. They have all of it. They have the Buddha there, and they have the incense, and they have what you don't know in the back with Tantra, and they have all kinds of stuff that you don't know. And you walk in because you're familiar, because you have a connection, you have an awareness for it, you're passionate about the subject, even though you never worship these things. And then you fall into it. In the same way that the guy might fall into Judaism because he was interested in ethics. That's called akara. So akara is that there is an awareness, it is intellectual, but there's already some kind of affinity, there's already some kind of feeling about it. It's not just something completely neutral. Okay? בבחינת ההרגשה כאילו רואה. But then there's also what we call actual sensing, feeling, which is a more manifest form of that. It's a more manifest form of connection. That you know something so well that you can feel it. It's as if you're seeing it. So when my father is no longer alive, but I care for him so much, I cared for him so much in my life, that in a moment, I can bring his image in front of me. Here it is. He's sitting here right next to me right now, and he's listening to, and I see what his face would look like if he would be listening to this. You can see it. That's a level of connection that's much, much higher. Because it's as if I can see the person. So he says, when you talk about loving kindness, if you have how did we develop our stories, our picture of what loving kindness is? Where did we get it from? From the Torah. We hear of Avram's loving kindness. We understand what it means that he went out to fight a battle to save his nephew, who he didn't have to. He was a wicked man, or at least he chose to live in a wicked environment, and he did nothing about it, apparently. He wanted to have nothing more to do with Avram, and then he saved everybody else also, and he brought everybody back. He's a man of loving kindness. And then he treats his son, who's however he is. Where did Isaac learn to love Esav? From Avram. He saw how you treat a son who's off the path. And many things. So we learn because we have these stories, and then we have Qasuk Chachamenu, right? I don't know if you grew up with Qasuk Chachamenu, but everybody in Israel did. There was a series, ingenious series, that somebody took many of the stories from the Talmud, and they wrote them in a form that's good for children, with very beautiful drawings, etchings, black and white, illustrations. And people's whole lives were built from this series of books. My grandmother, Lau Shalom, she gave me my first volume when I just learned how to read, when I was 7. I still have it here at home, with her dedication and this, for your 7th birthday, you should read these stories. And from those stories, now imagine you grow up with the Brothers Grimm. Okay? You see the difference. Right? If you haven't read the Brothers Grimm in the original, not saying you have to read it in German. I tried once and I didn't get very far, but it was one of the books I tried to read in German. But you read it in English, you can get the original. You can see what the world is about. The world is a terrible place. These stories, Qasuk Chachamenu, so did our sages. These are the acts of our sages. And you read...
It's translated into English as the path of our sages.
Could be. It's such a classic.
Who wrote it?
I don't know. But whoever did it, it was a greater act of Torah dissemination than anything that's ever been done. Without a doubt. There's no comparison. There's no comparison because you reach children at a stage of their lives where they're being formed, where their images of what life is about are being created. And that becomes they become their heroes. I mean, no, most people don't remember who the stories were about because there's so many sages and so many names. Maybe Rabbi Akiva, people remember because there's 1 story, 2 stories, maybe 3. But most of the sages you don't know more than 1, 2 stories about. But the stories themselves stick, so you don't remember who did it, but you remember what happened. Okay. My wife just now, she said to me, the thing that saved me as a child, her mother passed away when she was 8. She says, the thing that saved my faith in the world, my faith in humanity, my ability, she had a really tough childhood. I mean, really hard. I mean, knowing something that I know about psychology, I'd say that she went through the Holocaust. No different. It was more extended than the Holocaust. and it was done by people that were closer to her than what happened in the Holocaust. But in terms of the trauma that it leaves, in terms of the difficulty the person has to get over in life, that's what it is. She says the thing that saved her from completely giving up on the world was this series of books.
Well,
That's the level that there's that. Why? Because it gives you a picture, and it turned her into a loving, kind person. Because this is the hargasha. This is already that you see. These are the images that you see when you think of what is a good person, what is life about, where am I supposed to aim, where am I supposed to try to get to. So he says all this is what we get from the patriarchs. This ability that not only were they this type of person, but they gave us this path of increasing our awareness in such a way through their stories and through everything that's associated with them and the people who continued them, that it becomes as if we see it. As if we see what? The godliness. Meaning, what you're seeing in the end, when you're reading Qasuk or you're reading any story about Avram, what you're seeing is the godliness in this person. You're actually seeing this godliness. So in a certain sense, so when you say that Avram is Chesed, you're seeing that attribute of God. You're seeing what it looks like. Okay, so tomorrow we'll continue.
9 o'clock after school.
Okay.